Welcome to the dark side of true stories, where every whisper hides a secret and every silence has a scream. Subscribe now because here, the fear is real, and you never know who's listening. The sun had set hours ago, and the moon hung low over the abandoned military base. The wind whispered through the broken windows of the barracks, carrying with it the smell of rot and decay. I sat on the edge of the old wooden table, my fingers tracing the edges of a long-forgotten map that had seen better days. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. Across from me, 3 veterans stared into the distance, their faces etched with the kind of fatigue that could only come from years of combat and survival. I had known these men for years, but tonight, something was different. It was like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on us, urging us to share the stories that had been buried deep inside, locked away behind walls of silence and bravado. One of them, Sergeant Mitchell, the eldest of the group, took a deep drag from his cigarette and flicked the ash into the empty coffee cup beside him. His eyes were dark, haunted, as though the memories he carried were too heavy to bear. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You want to hear something real?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Something you'll never forget." The others nodded, their eyes never leaving him. They were used to Mitchell's stories, but tonight, there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in the armor that even they weren't used to hearing. "We were stationed in the mountains of Afghanistan," Mitchell began, his voice gravelly, the words carrying the weight of years of memories. "We were part of a small recon team, sent to monitor a remote village. It was supposed to be a simple mission. Get in, get out. But as you know, nothing's ever that simple in a war zone." I leaned forward, listening intently. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the story to unfold. We set up camp on the edge of the village, not far from a long-abandoned bunker. It had been deserted for years, at least. That's what we were told. The locals had always kept their distance, muttering things about it being cursed, about bad omens. But hell, we were soldiers. We didn't believe in curses. We thought it was all just superstition. Mitchell paused, taking another drag from his cigarette. His fingers trembled slightly as he flicked the ash again, his eyes distant, as though he were seeing something from that night, something I wasn't yet privy to. We didn't think anything of it. We set up camp near the old bunker, and everything was fine the first few nights. But on the 4th night, his voice faltered. Something changed. He looked up at me then, his eyes darkened, filled with something unspoken. "You ever hear of something called the Whispering Shadow?" I shook my head, unsure where he was going with this. The other veterans exchanged uneasy glances, their faces hardening, as though they were bracing for something they hadn't wanted to remember. "The locals warned us about it," Mitchell continued, his voice low. "They said it lived in the mountains, near the old bunker. They told us it was a creature, but not like anything we'd ever seen. It was more than that. A shadow that moved without being seen. A presence. Something that would follow you, wait for you to be alone. Then, whisper." Mitchell paused, looking around the room as if searching for some kind of reassurance. But none of the men offered him comfort. They all knew what he was talking about. We didn't take them seriously. Of course, Mitchell went on, his voice gaining strength. We were soldiers. We had guns. We had training. We were the ones who controlled the situation. But the first time we heard it, we didn't know what the hell to think. He took a deep breath and continued. "It was just after midnight. We were all awake, sitting by the fire, keeping watch. Suddenly, the wind stopped. It was dead silent. You ever felt that kind of silence? Like everything's holding its breath? That's when we heard it. A whisper. The room seemed to grow even quieter. The wind outside the building no longer the only thing moving. The flickering light bulb above us hummed, casting long shadows on the walls. The first one who heard it was Corporal Daniels. He was sitting at the edge of the camp, staring into the dark. He said it sounded like someone was standing right behind him, whispering his name. At first, we thought he was just losing it, sleep deprivation and all that. But then it came again. Mitchell's voice dropped, his eyes narrowing as if remembering the fear that gripped him that night. "Mitchell, Mitchell, double quotes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I heard it too. The whisper my name, but when I turned around, there was nothing but the pitch black. The kind of dark that swallows everything. The other men were still now, their eyes fixed on Mitchell. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They had all heard it, they had all felt it. We thought it was some kind of enemy tactic, trying to mess with our heads. But when it didn't stop, when it kept coming, that's when we started to get scared. One by one, we started to hear it. Whispers soft, like a breath in the dark, like something waiting to pounce. Mitchell's voice trembled slightly as he recalled the events. It was Daniels who broke first. He couldn't take it anymore. He bolted out of the camp, running straight toward the bunker. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. We followed him, but by the time we got there, he was gone. The air in the room seemed to grow colder still. I could feel my own pulse quicken, the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. We found him 2 days later, Mitchell continued. His body was stiff, like he had been frozen. But that wasn't the worst part. His eyes he trailed off, his voice faltering. His eyes were wide open. But it wasn't just that. His eyes were empty, hollow, like whatever had been inside him was gone. Like it had been sucked out of him. The other veterans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The room was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of their shared memory pressing down on me. What happened to Daniels? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell met my gaze, his face paled. I don't know, but I'll tell you this. Whatever was in that bunker, whatever was whispering to us, it wasn't human. We never went back, and we never spoke about it again, not until now. I sat there, speechless. The silence in the room was suffocating. The veterans were all staring at the table now, their faces somber, haunted. And then, just as I was about to speak, I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible whisper in the corner of the room. Mitchell ... I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The veteran's eyes went wide. Not again, one of them muttered, his hand shaking as he reached for his rifle. The whisper came again, this time louder. Not yet ... not yet. The wind howled outside, and the room felt smaller, darker. We weren't alone. We never had been, and I realized, in that moment, the thing they had feared for so long was still with them, still watching, still whispering. It wasn't just a story, it was a warning. The old mess hall was quiet, the shadows stretching long as the last of the sunlight disappeared behind the jagged mountains. I was sitting with 3 veterans, all of them older now, their faces weathered by time and the horrors they'd lived through. The room was thick with an unease that I couldn't shake, as though something was pressing down on us, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Sergeant Gray was the first to speak. His voice was gruff, but I could tell something in him had changed over the years. There was a darkness in his eyes that hadn't been there when I first met him. He looked at the others, each of them nodding, their faces hard and resigned. "You want to hear something that'll make your blood freeze?" Gray asked, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A story we've never told anyone, not the brass, not the families, not even the shrink." The other 2 men exchanged glances, their jaws tightening, but none of them stopped him. They all knew what was coming. I had heard bits and pieces of their past over the years. The war had changed all of them, but this was different. I could feel it in my bones. Something in the air had shifted, and I couldn't explain why. Gray cleared his throat, eyes flickering to the window where the wind howled, rattling the glass. "It was 96, he began, his voice low. "We were stationed at a remote base in Eastern Europe, a place called Kharkov, not a soul around for miles, just the base and the woods. The kind of place where the dead of winter takes on a life of its own. The kind of place you could hear things in the snow, things you weren't supposed to hear." I sat up straighter. The others were still, their faces grim. I could tell that whatever happened there, it wasn't something they'd ever fully come to terms with. "It was just after the first week of our deployment," Gray continued, his hand shaking slightly as he took a drag from his cigarette. "We were told it was a routine assignment, security, surveillance, standard stuff. But as soon as we got there, the men started acting weird. At first it was small things, skipping their routines, not showing up for roll call, that kind of thing. But then, it got worse." I leaned in, the tension growing with every word. "First, Corporal James went missing, just disappeared one night, no trace. The base was locked down tight. We searched for days, but there was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no footprints. It was like he vanished into thin air. We thought it was a prank at first, but after a while, no one was laughing." Gray took another drag, the smoke swirling around him, and then it happened again. "Sergeant Harrer, gone, just like that. No explanation, no noise, just gone." The room felt colder now, as if the shadows themselves were pressing closer. We all started hearing things after that. Voices, whispers in the dark, strange noises in the woods. It wasn't just the men, either. The dogs we kept for perimeter security, those dogs stopped barking, they stopped moving, they just sat there and stared at the woods, eyes wide open, like they were seeing something none of us could. He paused, and for a moment the only sound was the soft hiss of the heater in the corner. My heart was pounding in my chest now, the weight of his words sinking in. Then came the worst night of all, Gray continued, his voice barely audible now. The power went out, and we were left in complete darkness, complete silence, not a single sound. We'd gotten used to the whispers by then, but that night, it was different. The air felt wrong. Thick, like it was pressing in on us. Every man on that base felt it. The fear, the anxiety, the dread. It was like something was watching us, waiting. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the temperature in the room dropping despite the heater. Gray's eyes flicked to the door, as though something was just outside, something he could never quite shake off. It was during that night that we heard the scream. He said it quietly, but the words struck like a blow to my chest. It was James, Gray whispered. He came back, but it wasn't him, not really. My stomach twisted as I waited for him to continue. It was wrong. It wasn't just his voice, his body, it was the way he moved, the way he ... looked at us. His eyes were different. Black, his pupils were like two holes, sucking in the light, and his mouth, God, his mouth. He was smiling, not a normal smile. It was wide, too wide, and it didn't stop. No matter how much we yelled, no matter how much we begged for him to leave us alone, he just stood there in the doorway, grinning, silent. I could feel my heart racing. The others were still, their faces pale, as though they too were reliving that moment. Then, Gray went on. He spoke. His voice wasn't his own. It was ... low. It sounded like it was coming from the walls, from everywhere, like it wasn't just him standing there, but something else was inside him. Gray took a long pause, and the room seemed to hold its breath. It said one thing, he whispered. You're all going to die here. I swallowed hard. The tension in the room was suffocating now. We tried to fight it off, tried to get him out of there, Gray continued, but he wasn't human anymore. That thing, whatever it was, had taken him. We could see it, the way he moved. It was like he was a puppet, strings pulled by something we couldn't see. It dragged him away, deeper into the base, into the woods. We never saw him again. The silence in the room stretched out for what felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, but I couldn't form the words to ask the question I needed answered. Did you ever leave? I managed to choke out what happened next. Gray shook his head slowly, as if the memory itself was too much to bear. We couldn't. None of us could. The base, it wouldn't let us. We tried to pack up, tried to leave, but every time we tried to drive out, the road shifted. It was like the base was changing. The woods, they moved. And no matter where we went, we always ended up back at the same spot, at the same mess hall, at the same barracks. I could feel the walls closing in on me. My pulse was racing, my palms sweating. We were trapped, Gray muttered, his voice barely a whisper. And that thing in the woods, it was waiting, watching, waiting for us to break, for us to become like them. One of the other veterans, Corporal Nash, finally spoke, his voice shaky. We're the lucky ones, you know? We got out, but we're still there, in those woods, still hearing those whispers. Gray looked up at me then, his eyes hollow, and when the sun sets, when the darkness falls, it's still waiting for the rest of us. Because we're not gone, not really. The temperature in the room dropped again, and I couldn't help but look over my shoulder. The whispers, faint but unmistakable, seemed to float in on the air, curling around my ears. I could have sworn I heard something behind me, a voice, a whisper, just above a breath. You're all going to die here. I turned, but there was nothing there, nothing but shadows stretching long across the floor. And I knew, in that moment, they weren't just telling a story. They were warning me. Do you like this personality? The old military base sat on the edge of nowhere, hidden away in the rolling hills, its silence echoing the stories of those who had served there. I had been invited to meet with 3 veterans men who had spent decades keeping their memories buried deep in the dark recesses of their minds. The room where we sat was dim, the smell of stale coffee and old leather hanging in the air. Outside, the wind howled through the cracked windows, but inside, it was deathly still. They sat around the table, their eyes tired but sharp, faces hardened by years of war and the trauma it brought. There was a heaviness in the air tonight, something thick, pressing down on us, urging us to speak about the unspeakable. Sergeant Bennett, the oldest of the 3, leaned forward, his voice rough as he spoke, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the room. You want to know about the real horrors? He asked, his eyes flicking to each of us. We've all seen death, the kind that leaves scars on the soul. But there's one thing that happened at that damned base that none of us can forget. It's not the enemy we feared. It was something else, ... Something that came from within. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The others too were silent, their faces grim. Bennett took a deep breath before continuing. It was back in '94. The base was remote, far from civilization. We were stationed there as part of a covert operation. We were supposed to be there for a few months, just some routine maintenance, intelligence gathering, that sort of thing. But the moment we arrived, something was off. I don't know how to explain it, but you could feel it in your bones. Something wrong was waiting for us. The other two men, Corporal Daniels and Sergeant Harlow, didn't speak. They just nodded, as if they had lived through the same nightmare and didn't need to say a word. The first strange thing happened on the third night, Bennett said, his voice trembling slightly. We were on night patrol, covering the outer perimeter. Everything was quiet to quiet. No animals, no sounds from the woods. Just an unnatural silence. We kept hearing rustling sounds, like branches cracking or something moving through the underbrush. But when we'd check it out, there was nothing there. At first we thought it was just paranoia, but then, he paused, his eyes distant, haunted. Then we saw the shadows. I leaned forward instinctively, unable to keep myself from asking, "Shadows?" He nodded, his gaze flickering briefly to the others, who looked just as unnerved as he did. We were walking past the abandoned hangar when we saw them. Bennett continued, his voice low, as though speaking louder might make the memories worse. Shadow stall moving against the moonlight, stretching across the ground like something out of a nightmare. We thought it was just the light playing tricks on us, but when we looked closer, the shadows were moving, independently, not in sync with anything. They were following us. The other men shifted in their seats, their hands clenched around their mugs. Bennett paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Daniels said he saw something in the shadow, something watching us, like eyes. But there was nothing out there, just the darkness. We tried to write it off, just fatigue. But then it started happening every night, every patrol. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I listened. But it wasn't just the shadows, Bennett said, his voice now barely a whisper. The dreams started. At first, just a few of us. But then all of us, every single man on that base, we'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, and the dreams. They weren't normal. They weren't just nightmares. We saw it something in the dark, watching us, waiting for us. I could feel the tension building in the room, each word from Bennett sending a ripple through the veterans around the table. Their faces were pale, lips pressed together tightly, as though they were afraid of what would happen if they spoke too much. We tried to get some answers, Bennett went on, his voice almost trembling now. We contacted higher-ups, but no one knew anything. We searched the base for signs of, well, anything that could explain what was going on. But all we found was more darkness, more silence. And then, he swallowed hard. And then, on the fifth night, one of our men, Lency Cookpora Morgan, he went missing. A silence filled the room, and I could see the horror flicker in the veteran's eyes. Daniels, the youngest of the three, finally spoke up, his voice raw with emotion. Morgan didn't just vanish, Daniels said, his voice cracking. We found his gear, his rifle, his helmet left behind in the woods, like he just disappeared. But it wasn't just that. When we went to look for him, we found something else. The trees were twisted, not like natural growth, but like something had forced them to bend, to shift in unnatural angles. And in the middle of it all, there was Morgan's body, face down in the dirt. The words hit like a punch to the gut. But it wasn't just the description of the body that left me cold. It was the way Daniels paused, the way his hand trembled as he held his mug, like the memory itself was too much to bear. His face was wrong, Daniels said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes, they were wide open, but there was no life in them. It was like something had taken him. His body was stiff, but the worst part, his mouth was smiling. It was as if he was happy, and we all knew he wasn't. I could barely breathe now, the weight of the story pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. Sergeant Harlow finally spoke, his voice low and distant. After that, we knew something had changed. The base wasn't just haunted, was alive. Alive with something else. And whatever it wasn't human. Bennett finished the story with a final, chilling note. We tried to leave, tried to run, but it wouldn't let us. Every road we took led us right back to that damn base. The trees kept us trapped. We could hear Morgan's laugh echoing in the distance, like it was him, but it wasn't him anymore. He was just a shell. The room was dead silent now. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the story hanging in the air like an open wound. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I had to. What happened to you? How did you get out? Bennett closed his eyes, the weight of the memory heavy on his shoulders. We didn't get out. Not really. Not until we stopped looking, until we stopped running. But it's still out there, still watching, and it's still waiting for us to come back. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and for a moment I thought I heard something soft, barely perceptible. A whisper, a voice on the wind. It's still here, and I knew, deep in my gut, that I would never escape it. None of us would. The night we gathered in the old military lodge, it felt as though the darkness outside was creeping in, pressing its weight against the walls. The air was thick, the kind of heavy silence that seemed to fill every corner of the room, a stark contrast to the laughter and camaraderie that had once echoed through these walls when we were all younger. The three veterans sat around the table, their faces worn by time and countless battles, their eyes carrying the weight of memories they wished they could forget. Sergeant Thompson, a man who had seen it all, was the first to speak. His hands were wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm coffee, and his voice, deep and steady, cut through the stillness like a blade. "Everyone's got their stories," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "We all have the things we've seen, the things that stick with us. But there's one story we've never told anyone. Not the brass, not the families, not anyone." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "You're asking for it, so you're gonna hear it, but be warned. Some things aren't meant to be told." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. The others nodded solemnly, their faces unreadable, but there was an underlying tension in the room that couldn't be ignored. "It was 99, Thompson continued, his eyes distant, as though he were seeing it all again, playing out in his mind like a horror movie. "We were stationed in the middle of nowhere, deep in the heart of the desert, a place called Blackthorn Ridge, just a small outpost at the edge of the world. You wouldn't think there was much out there, but there was always something ... off about it. We didn't know it then, but that place was cursed." I felt a chill creep down my spine, and I leaned in closer, unable to tear my eyes away from Thompson's face. His words were like a magnet, pulling me in deeper. "It started small," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "At first it was just the heat. It was unbearable, like the air was alive, pressing down on you, trying to suffocate you. But then the weird stuff started happening, small things. The radios would cut out for no reason, or the generators would shut down in the middle of the night. The dogs started acting up, barking at nothing, growling at shadows. The men, they started seeing things. I felt a knot form in my stomach, the suspense building with each word he spoke. They said they saw something out there," Thompson went on, his eyes narrowing. "Shadows, figures moving in the sand, but we couldn't find any footprints. Nothing, just ... The feeling that we were being watched." The others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Corporal Hayes, the youngest of the group, spoke up, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. The heat. It wasn't just physical, it was like it was ... pressing in on us. And those things we saw, they weren't just shadows, they moved differently, like they were alive in a way that didn't make sense." Thompson nodded slowly, as though Hayes' words struck a chord. "Yeah, that's when it really started. We'd go out on patrol, but when we came back, there'd be footprints. But they weren't our footprints. They were different. Too deep, like something heavy had been walking around our camp while we were gone. I could feel my heart pounding now, each beat louder than the last. The unease in the room was palpable, like a thick fog creeping over us, suffocating the air. But it wasn't just the footprints or the strange shapes in the sand. One night we heard something, not from outside, but from inside the barracks. At first it sounded like someone walking around, but when we got up to check, no one was there, just the wind. And then, Hayes whispered, his voice shaking, the screams started. My blood ran cold. "Screams?" I asked, barely able to get the word out. He nodded. "Every night, right around midnight, we'd hear them, low, guttural, like someone in pain. But no one ever went outside to check. We were too afraid. It wasn't just the screams, it was the silence that came afterward. Everything went dead silent. No wind, no sound, nothing. Like the desert itself was holding its breath." Thompson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. "We tried to leave. We did. We packed up, got ready to head out. But every time we tried to leave, the road shifted. We'd end up back at the same place, over and over again. The same spot, the same camp. I could barely breathe now." "What did you do?" "We had no choice," Thompson said, his voice hardening. "We had to stay, but after that, we didn't sleep. Not a single one of us. We couldn't. We could feel that something was out there, watching us, waiting for the right moment. It was like the very air had turned against us, like the desert itself was alive. He fell silent for a moment, staring off into the distance. Hayes, who had been fidgeting nervously, spoke again. We weren't alone out there. Not just the men, not just the shadows. There was something else. Something older than anything we could understand. It wanted us. It needed us. I felt my pulse quicken as I leaned in, my body tense. What was it? What was out there? Thompson finally looked up, his eyes dark and heavy with fear. We didn't know what it was, but we knew what it did. One of the men, Private Carter, he was the first to go. He disappeared in the middle of the night. We heard him scream, heard his voice calling for help. But by the time we got outside, there was nothing but the sand and there was no body. Just his voice, echoing in the wind. Carter's body was never found, Hayes added, his voice breaking. But the worst part, every night after that, we could hear him, his voice, calling for us, begging us to help him, but it wasn't really him. It was something in his voice, something twisted, like it was using him as bait. I felt the room grow colder, the air thick with the weight of their words. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me now. And then, one by one, Thompson continued, we all started hearing it. The whispers, soft at first, like the wind, but then louder, sharper, as if it were speaking right into our ears. It wasn't just the voices, it was what they said. What did they say? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Thompson's face grew pale. They said, you belong to us now. Over and over, you belong to us now. And then, on the last night, he trailed off, his voice barely audible. The others seemed to recoil at the memory. On the last night we saw it, Hayes whispered, his voice barely a rasp. It wasn't human. It was something else. A creature, made of shadows and sand, with eyes like black pits, and it was walking toward us. It was the desert. It was the wind, the sand, the shadows, all wrapped into one. And it wanted us. Thompson's eyes met mine, and I could see the terror there. The recognition that the horror wasn't just a story, it was real. We never spoke about it again. Not to anyone. But it never left us, that thing. It's still out there, and it's waiting for us to come back. Because once you've been claimed by it, you don't ever really escape. I could hear it then, the faintest sound, the whispering in the wind, like the rustling of something ancient, something that had been waiting. You belong to us now. And I realized, in that moment, that this story was more than just a tale. It was a warning. The desert, the shadows, and whatever lived in the darkness, it was waiting, watching. And I wasn't sure I'd ever leave here alive. The room was silent. The wind outside was louder now, its howls filling the void, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. We were never meant to hear this story. The night was unnaturally quiet when we gathered in the dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows with a sound that seemed to scrape the very edges of sanity. Inside, the four of us sat in a tight circle, the shadows cast by the fire flickering across the walls, making the room feel smaller with every passing second. We were veterans, men who had seen the worst the world had to offer, but tonight, even we could sense something was wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, like the world itself was holding its breath. We weren't supposed to be here, not in this place, but we couldn't help ourselves. There were stories of things that happened to us, to those who had come before us. And tonight, they were going to be told. Sergeant Landon, the oldest among us, was the one who spoke first. His weathered face was grim, eyes sunken from years of sleepless nights and battles fought both on the field and in his mind. He cleared his throat, his voice rough as he began. You want to hear about the worst thing that ever happened to us, the thing we still can't explain. He paused, his gaze flicking to each of us, then back to the fire. I hope you're ready, because this isn't a story you tell lightly. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We all knew what he was about to say. It was 2003, Landon began, the words slow and deliberate, as though he was testing them on his tongue before he let them spill out. We were stationed in a small, abandoned outpost on the edge of the Syrian desert. It wasn't much, just some old barracks, a few supply crates, and a radio tower. No blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing, just gone. I could feel my heart begin to race. This wasn't just some strange desert phenomenon. This was something different, something that we would not understand. Landon paused, staring at the fire, lost in the memory. We started hearing things after that, whispers in the night, soft at first, like the wind, but unmistakable words. Names, our names, calling us by our ranks. At first we thought it was the heat, the exhaustion, whatever. But it wasn't just one of us hearing it, it was all of us. We'd lie in our bunks, trying to sleep, and we'd hear it, someone whispering our names. But when we got up to look, there was nothing, not a soul around, just the silence. It wasn't until the third night, Landon continued, his voice dropping lower, that we realized something was wrong. We were out on a routine patrol when we found the first body. He took another drag, his hand shaking slightly as he spoke. It was Private Henderson. He was just lying there in the middle of the road, face down, when we turned him over. His face, it was twisted, like he was grinning. His eyes were wide open, but they were blank, like he wasn't seeing us. He was staring at something behind us. We searched him, and there were no wounds, no signs of injury, nothing, but he was dead. The silence in the room grew thick, suffocating. But here's the thing, Landon continued, his voice barely a whisper now. When we buried him, when we dug the grave and put him in the ground, the very next morning, he was gone. His body was gone, just like Martin and Whitaker. We searched the area, dug up the grave again, nothing. The others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper. I could hear the wind outside, but it felt distant, as though the very air in the cabin had frozen in place. And then, Landon's voice trembled as he spoke the next part. We started hearing their voices, all of them, Martin, Whitaker, Henderson. They called out to us, we heard them screaming for help, pleading, but it wasn't just their voices. There was something else with them, something darker, something we couldn't see. It sounded like it was tearing at the fabric of reality itself. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew this story. I had heard the whispers, had felt that same terror creep into my bones during those long, sleepless nights. We tried to leave, Landon said, his voice strained. But no matter which direction we went, no matter how far we drove, we always ended up back at that outpost. It was like we were trapped, like the land itself had shifted. The road would loop back on itself. We couldn't escape. And that's when we realized the base wasn't abandoned. It had never been abandoned. Something had been waiting for us. I looked at the other men around the table. They were pale, eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen in years. What was it? I finally asked, my voice barely audible. Landon looked at me, his eyes full of a terror that seemed too real to be a dream. Whatever it wasn't human. It was the desert itself, I think, the land. The spirits of the dead who had been buried there long before we ever showed up. But it wanted something. It wanted us, all of us, It called us. He leaned forward, his voice trembling now. We were all gonna die there, but some of us, we got lucky. One by one we left. Somehow we broke free. But every man who stayed behind, vanished. No bodies, no sign of them. Just gone. The wind outside began to howl louder, rattling the walls of the cabin as if it were alive, pressing against the thin barrier between us and the darkness outside. And I asked, my voice barely a whisper, what happened to you? Landon's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, I could see something dark and unfathomable swirling within them. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He closed his eyes, as though trying to shut out the memory. The land doesn't let you go, he said quietly. Not completely. Once it has you, it owns you. Every night I hear their voices calling to me, and I know one day it's going to come for me, for all of us. The desert never forgets. The room fell silent, the only sound the wind outside, now a low guttural growl, as if the very earth was warning us that some places, some things, should never be uncovered, and that once the land has your soul, it never truly lets you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Every comment adds a new shadow to our haunted corner of the internet. Share this if you know someone who enjoys a good scare. More spine-chilling stories are coming soon, and remember, the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to you. Thanks for watching if you dare.